There are games that I want to play not simply because you guys recommend them, even though I do appreciate every single one of your guys' recommendations, because after all, you guys are the backbone of this channel, or just because I want to experience them, especially in this case as a lifelong Zelda fan, but because at some point I began to realize just how much of the gaming history I know seems to orbit around them. Well, surprise, little did you know, I've actually been playing this game for weeks. And I actually played another Zelda game before this, one you've all been asking for and one you guys wanted me to experience first, because the Zelda franchise deserves to be properly experienced. But I wanted to talk about this one first so you can get ready for that next Zelda video. A Link to the Past has always been one of those games for me. You know, one of those games that you know is legendary and is even part of your favorite franchise, but for whatever reason, you've yet to experience it. Having spent most of my life deeply attached to the Zelda series, especially through games like Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword, and Twilight Princess, I had always understood A Link to the Past more through reputation than personal experience. But unlike most of the games that I've been playing in this series, I was actually very familiar with A Link to the Past before playing it. I've spent hours watching theory videos, timeline videos, lore videos, binging Zeltic theory videos, so I'm very familiar with the game, at least as far as the story, lore, placement in the timeline, and its importance within the series. It was always that Zelda game, you know, the one that longtime fans constantly point back towards whenever conversations about the greatest games ever made come up. The one that people would argue about with me when I said that Ocarina of Time was the best game ever made. And going into it, somehow, for the first time ever, I actually expected it to live up to the hype. The Legend of Zelda franchise is my favorite franchise of all time, so for the first time in this Regress series, I went into this as a fanboy, fully expecting to be wowed by my favorite video game series of all time. And somehow, my expectations were still too low. Hey there all you beautiful guardians of the glaze. Welcome back to the Milky Donut. If you're new here, this is the Milky Donut. We do all things video games, movies, and pop culture. And if you're not new here, well, we know who the good-looking friend is. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Well, before we yet again jump back into our video game time travel machine, as always, I would like to mention that I do have a goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers as quickly as I can. So if you could go ahead and like this video, leave the glaziest of comments, hype it if you can, and subscribe if you think it's worthy of the algorithm. As always, shout out to the subscriber of the week, Mr. Atari Tom, and make sure you stick around until the end of the video for the reveal of the brand new subscriber of the week, because it could very well be you. And with all that nonsense out of the way, let's play a game that I've literally been waiting years to play, and one that I have a feeling will become another one of my favorite video games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I'm going to start off by reiterating something that I've said countless times within this series, and I don't care how annoying it gets because it deserves to be said as many times as possible, at least in my opinion. And that's just how confident the opening is, as almost every Zelda game is. As I've said countless times, modern games often spend far too much time preparing you to begin the actual experience. Tutorials drag on endlessly, mechanics are explained in painful detail, and the opening hours often feel more like guided tours than genuine beginnings. Well, A Link to the Past does none of that. It wastes absolutely 0% of your time. While yes, of course, there are subtle things that act as a tutorial, such as lifting up the bush that reveals the secret entrance into Hyrule Castle, indirectly teaching you that lifting such things is a mechanic, it's never jarring or obvious. The game begins with a violent thunderstorm crashing over Hyrule as Princess Zelda reaches out telepathically asking for help. Within minutes, you leave the house pushing through the rain, sneaking into Hyrule Castle through a secret entrance, and eventually you find your fatally wounded uncle inside the castle dungeon. Before dying, he gives Link his sword and shield and asks him to rescue Princess Zelda, thus sending you on your exciting hero's quest. No extended exposition or interruptions, just straight to the facts while giving you enough to make the story feel deep and meaningful. And guess what? Your boy Milky actually read the manual for this game because I felt like I especially owed it to A Link to the Past to do so. And I'm tired of you guys yelling at me that old games have manuals, okay? I understand now. And yet again, despite the technological limitations of 1991, those opening minutes of the game managed to create an incredible amount of, you know the drill, say it with me, atmosphere. Yeah, it's been a couple videos since I've said atmosphere, so it feels good to say it. And there it is, my favorite word, and one of the biggest reasons I've always loved this series. When I tell you I was practically drooling over the little details, I'm not exaggerating. like walking through the castle while hearing the rain suddenly become muffled because I've moved indoors, or watching dark rooms slowly illuminate after lighting torches, or the subtle sound of shallow water splashing against Link's boots while moving through dungeons. I just love it so much. I love the Zelda series, man. It's just so good. On one hand, I'm mad at myself for not having played this game earlier, but I'm also glad I'm doing it now with the mindset I've acquired through recently playing older games. It was moments like these that constantly reminded me that Nintendo clearly cared about details far beyond what a lot of games were attempting at the time, and that attention to detail exists everywhere else at the same time. The more I played and explored, the more I started noticing just how polished everything really is. It's difficult to explain until you experience it for yourself, which is what you've all been telling me, but nearly every action in this game feels extremely satisfying. Swinging your sword feels responsive, and the hit detection is actually perfect, which is nothing really new to the series unless we're talking about the Wii motion controls, but you know what? I liked it at the time, so deal with it. The spin attack, diagonal movement, shield mechanics, and even the item switching for the most part, every interaction has a strong sense of refinement where nothing feels unfinished. Even ignoring all of the Zelda goodness, it just simply feels good to play. I really tried to take off my fanboy goggles while playing this to give you guys a genuine experience. But then there's the exploration, which may honestly be the strongest part of the entire experience. I know that's a crazy take, and the element of exploration is something I fully expected to deliver because the Zelda series is absolutely no stranger to creating immersive, atmospheric, and in-depth worlds that are masterclass works of game design and are a true experience to explore. So to say that my expectations were high would be a severe understatement. I've played plenty of modern open-world games that claim to reward exploration, but what they often mean is either following objective markers placed conveniently around a map until the game congratulates you for pretending to discover something, or giving you so much openness that it completely forgets to put anything within that world to make it feel alive or like there's even a point for progressing. While A Link to the Past operates from an entirely different philosophy. A Link to the Past is a game that started the quote-unquote classic Zelda formula that I'm always ranting and raving about. The world constantly encourages experimentation without directly telling you to do so. Because in typical Zelda fashion, you bomb suspicious walls, you pick up oddly placed rocks, you cut grass. Why? Because you gotta. Dash headfirst into trees using the Pegasus boots just to see what falls out. Use fire where you normally wouldn't think to use it and pay attention to unreachable ledges and quietly remember them for later. My Zelda-infused brain immediately began cataloging places I couldn't yet access, knowing a future item would allow me to eventually return. The world itself feels like one giant puzzle box constantly dangling solutions just barely out of reach, yet ever so elegantly put together in a mostly linear fashion without feeling overly constrictive. As usual, every new item fundamentally changes how you view dungeons and Hyrule itself. The hookshot, just like in Ocarina of Time, although it did make an appearance here first, suddenly turns gaps into pathways. The hammer reveals entirely new routes, and the magic mirror completely changes how you interact with the world around you, with its main function being allowing Link to warp back and forth from the Dark World to the Light World at almost any time. Unlike some later Zelda games where dungeon items often feel tied exclusively to one puzzle mechanic before quietly being abandoned afterward, nearly everything you collect here feels useful for the entirety of the game, at least for the most part. And then you're introduced to the Dark World, and like I mentioned earlier, I actually knew that this mechanic existed beforehand, but experiencing it firsthand completely changed my appreciation for what Nintendo had accomplished with it. The first time I was pulled into the Dark World, despite even knowing about its existence, it did genuinely catch me off guard, because up until that moment, Hyrule had felt adventurous and colorful, but then suddenly everything becomes unsettling. Just like in Ocarina of Time when you walk out of the Temple of Time 7 years later, and that drastic twist in tone hits you. The music shifts into something more mysterious and oppressive. Familiar landmarks become twisted reflections of themselves, and areas that you previously had a firm grasp on now require completely different ways of thinking. But it doesn't feel like simply receiving a second map for the sake of added content. It feels like the entire tone of the adventure and story has shifted, which is something the Zelda series has masterfully done time and time again. And from that point onward, the exploration becomes even more brilliant. You constantly bounce between the light and dark world versions of Hyrule, using one world to solve problems that reside within the other. Entire progression paths revolve around understanding the geography itself. The entire design structure of A Link to the Past is so intelligently designed, it actually blows my mind. But I mean, it is the Zelda series we're talking about here. Every location now exists within 2 dimensions at once, forcing you to think spatially in ways few games were doing at the time or even today. It really is some of the best exploration and progression design I've ever experienced, right up there with Ocarina of Time and my newly discovered favorites like Super Metroid and Castlevania. And don't even get me started on the dungeons, because the dungeon design deserves just as much praise. Real quick, before we jump into the dungeons, I wanted to let you all know that YouTube memberships are officially live here on the channel. It's a bit difficult to try to work full time while trying to give you all the best content possible, but I am truly trying my best for all of my beautiful Guardians of the Glaze. If you've been enjoying the journey so far and want to help support what we're building here at the Milky Donut, there are now 3 different ways to become an elite member of the Army of the Glaze. As a Guardian of the Glaze, you'll get custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority replies to your comments so I can make sure I'm seeing what you guys want to see. If you join as a Donut Disciple, you'll unlock members-only chat rooms, exclusive polls where you can help shape future content, plus everything from the Guardian of the Glaze tier. And for those of you who want the full premium experience, Grandmaster Glazer gives you members-only live chats, channel shoutouts, exclusive videos, and even the ability to request games directly to me that you'd like to see covered on the channel, guaranteeing that the request will happen in a timely fashion. And those exclusive videos will only be available to members within the Grandmaster Glazer tier. So if you'd like to support the channel and get extra behind the scenes access, all while helping decide where this retro journey goes next, check out the join button below. And seriously, thank you all for making this channel grow way more than I ever expected. It's amazing. Even if you never become a member, I will always appreciate you just as much as I always have. Because the Milky Donut has never been and never will be about money. But honesty and transparency with you guys is important to me, so I'd be lying to you if I told you I wasn't trying to monetize my channel. Alright, enough panhandling, back to the dungeons. Zelda dungeons are easily my favorite part of the series, which is why I want them to return to their former glory even if it's within an open world. The Eastern Palace serves as an incredibly elegant introduction to Zelda dungeon philosophy. It teaches you almost immediately that these spaces are not simply combat arenas, but layered puzzles requiring observation and understanding of item usage, again that classic Zelda formula. The Tower of Hera was the first dungeon where I began noticing how much the game values vertical design, implementing elements that I had originally thought were born in later 3D entries, but Milky is an idiot. Floors begin interacting with one another, platforming becomes more deliberate and important, and the game starts playing with physical space in ways that make the dungeon as a whole feel like the puzzle rather than simply the rooms within it. Inside the Palace of Darkness, key management becomes significantly more demanding. Rooms become larger and far more interconnected, while enemy placement becomes far more aggressive. For the first time, I had to stop approaching dungeons room by room and begin thinking about them as one large interconnected structure. One of the dungeons that completely changed the way I thought about A Link to the Past was Skull Woods, because up until that point, I had started to understand the rhythm of the dungeons, or so I thought. You walk into a contained space, solve puzzles room by room, grab a new item, beat the boss, and move on. You know, the classic Zelda formula. But Skull Woods completely breaks that formula in a way that completely threw a wrench in what I thought I knew. What makes it so good is that the dungeon doesn't feel self-contained at all, which is funny because containment is one of the reasons I think Zelda dungeons are so good. But instead of existing within one building or one temple, the entire forest itself is pretty much the dungeon. I was constantly dropping into different entrances, exiting back into the overworld, then re-entering from somewhere else. The boss, Mathula, might be one of the hardest moments in the entire game because the second that fight starts, everything becomes absolute chaos. The floor moves beneath you and spikes are sliding around the room, lasers are firing at you, all while you're trying to land hits without getting thrown into hazards every 2 seconds. I think this was the first dungeon where I stopped thinking, wow, this game has aged really well, and I started thinking, nah, this is genuinely better designed than a lot of games, like ever. Which is all fine and dandy, but when I reached dungeons like the Palace of Darkness as I mentioned earlier, and the later Ice Palace, the true Zelda lover was awakened within me. These were a few of the many moments where it stopped feeling like I was progressing through a really good Zelda game and started to feel like I was experiencing something genuinely legendary. Up until then, the game had been fantastic, don't get me wrong, but these dungeons feel like the point where A Link to the Past completely removes the training wheels and just started to trust me to figure things out all on my own. Let's go back to the Palace of Darkness for a second. That was the first dungeon that really gave me that experience. Everything felt bigger, more dangerous, and far more complex than anything the game had thrown at me previously. The enemies were more aggressive, the layout was way less straightforward, and suddenly it felt like the game expected me to fully understand every strategy that I'd learned up to that point. And what stood out the most was just how adventurous and, Zelda-y, I guess I could say, the entire dungeon felt, and I mean all the dungeons felt that way. I wasn't simply moving from room to room solving isolated puzzles. There were collapsing bridges I had to outrun, hidden pathways buried within the environments, which I mean is nothing new to Zelda, switches tucked behind clever puzzle design, and moments where I genuinely felt like I was uncovering secrets rather than following a linear path. Even something as simple as finding the magic hammer felt incredibly satisfying because, as I mentioned earlier, unlike some dungeon items that feel nothing more than situational, this instantly became another essential part of my arsenal. And by the time I made my way to Helmasaur King, I realized this game wasn't just holding up well for its age, it was straight up better than a lot of modern action-adventure games, yes, including other Zelda games that I've played. Sorry, I'm rambling about the dungeons, but I mean, you kinda have to. And later on came the Ice Palace, and what impressed me there was how completely different the challenge felt while somehow being just as good. More frustrating, absolutely, but also good. If the Palace of Darkness felt like I was being tested to see if I understood the combat and exploration, the Ice Palace feels like it wanted to test whether I had actually learned how the Zelda formula works. The atmosphere alone immediately stood out to me because of course it did. Come on, you guys know me. The deeper you descend underground, the whole dungeon starts feeling colder, heavier, and more hostile in a way that adds tension. But what really sold me that this was a good Zelda game was one puzzle where I found myself completely stuck staring at a room with a floor and a switch and no obvious solution. Well, Milky, it turns out that the obvious solution was to not be an idiot with a double-digit IQ. After running around in circles for way longer than I'd like to admit, I finally realized that I could push a block through a hole in the floor, drop down after it, and use that same block in the room below. It sounds simple in hindsight, but the reason that moment stood out so much is because the game never explains that that's even possible, and that's one of my favorite aspects of Zelda games. They allow you to experiment, think logically, and connect the dots all on your own, and that's what I loved most about not only both of these dungeons, but all of the dungeons. They all just represent everything that makes A Link to the Past and Zelda games feel so special decades later. Neither dungeon relies on spectacle or hand-holding. They just force you to observe your surroundings, think creatively, and slowly realize that the game is far more intelligent than you initially may have given it credit for. It's crazy just how much atmosphere this game creates. I know I'm back on my soapbox, but I've just always believed that older games often had stronger music because technical limitations forced developers to create emotion through sound rather than relying entirely on graphical fidelity. Well, as a surprise to absolutely no one, A Link to the Past reinforces that idea tenfold. Kakariko Village, as usual, feels warm and comforting. The Lost Woods theme carries a mysterious melancholy that immediately makes the forest feel ancient and mysterious. And the Dark World theme might be one of the strongest pieces of music in the entire franchise, and I'm not even kidding. It sounds dangerous, foreboding, and oppressive. I found myself thinking about every major Zelda experience I've loved throughout my entire life, and trust me, there are hundreds, and how they seem to trace directly back to the ideas that are perfected right here. The atmospheric world design I loved from Ocarina of Time. The dungeon-focused progression that I loved in Skyward Sword, and the constant sense of discovery I loved from Breath of the Wild. It was all started right here with A Link to the Past. The environmental puzzles, the subtle storytelling, and the feeling that Hyrule itself is a place full of secrets quietly waiting for curious explorers. For years, I associated these feelings most strongly with Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, which makes sense because they are my two favorite Zelda games of all time and the ones that I played first, but sitting here after finishing A Link to the Past, I realized something. I had spent my entire life loving a formula that had already been perfected in 1991. And perhaps that's what makes this game so remarkable. People, including you guys, my Guardians of the Glaze, often call it one of the greatest games ever made. And from a modern perspective, I think that can sometimes create unrealistic expectations. But in the case of A Link to the Past, I don't even think that does it justice. When you reach the final confrontation with Ganon, you're treated to a boss fight that beautifully demonstrates why A Link to the Past remains one of the most respected entries in the entire Zelda franchise. By the time you reach this moment, all of those hours spent learning the game's mechanics through carefully designed dungeons, item progression, and increasingly demanding combat encounters all build up to this one legendary confrontation. The battle against Ganon serves as the ultimate culmination of all those lessons, forcing you to utilize multiple tools and think strategically rather than simply attacking until the fight's over. Now obviously I'm very biased, and it is Ganon fighting Link in the final moments of my epic adventures, so that alone makes it amazing and is enough to damn near bring a tear to my eye. But what also makes this battle so amazing is how mechanically demanding it is. Throughout the battle, you have to avoid Ganon's unpredictable movement patterns, dodge his attacks while sections of the floor begin to collapse beneath him, use the lamp to reveal his vulnerable state, and finally finish the battle with the silver arrows, which, to be completely transparent, the only reason I knew that's how you won this battle was from watching theory videos, or else I never would have known that's what you're supposed to do. But in hindsight, they are an item that the game had ever so quietly been building the importance of for much of the adventure. The presentation elevates the final battle even further. The final battle theme abandons much of the adventurous and triumphant tone heard throughout the rest of the soundtrack in favor of something far more urgent and aggressive, but also with an ever so nuanced underlying tone that sounds almost heroic. as you slowly chip away at Ganon's health. Even within the technical limitations of the SNES era, the music succeeds in creating a sense of tension that makes the battle feel genuinely climactic. But I mean, is anyone surprised that the music is amazing here? Because if you are, you shouldn't be. That, combined with the dark atmosphere of Ganon's pyramid and the visual spectacle of the arena slowly collapsing as the battle progresses, the game manages to create a finale that feels incredibly dramatic without relying on cinematic cutscenes or modern presentation techniques. It's ultimately this intense and deliberate attention to design that makes A Link to the Past feel so enduring. Its final battle isn't simply an epic ending, but a perfect representation of the game itself. A Link to the Past is not extraordinary simply because it influenced literally everything great that followed. It's extraordinary because after decades of technological progress, countless imitators, and an entire genre built from its ideas, it just might be the best to ever do it. It's not just historically fascinating or impressive for its time, it's just a genuine masterclass of how to create a perfectly designed video game. And it hits me even harder because my favorite game/piece of media ever wouldn't even exist if it weren't for this game. There is a reason, after all, people still return to it over 30 years later and call it one of the best games ever made. And that's because A Link to the Past is an absolute work of art that deserves every bit of glaze it's ever received. And with that, we come to the end of our time travel journey. As always, I had an absolute blast with A Link to the Past, and I feel like I can officially call myself a true Zelda fan, even though I've been obsessed with this series for as long as I've been able to pick up a controller. But do you prefer old games or new games? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to see more of this, feel free to drop what you'd like to see next in the comments as well. And don't be afraid to re-comment your recommendations on every video because it doesn't annoy me and it only increases the chance that you'll see me play it sooner than later. The brand new subscriber of the week is none other than Mr. Stephen P5476 because you, my loyal guardian, have sent super chats, engaged with the channel, and commented your recommendations. Thank you for being such an amazing guardian of the glaze. Don't forget, I am holding a competition for you artists out there to design me a new avatar to replace my AI slap avatar. The deadline is July 1st, and you can email your design to officialmilkydonut@gmail.com. The rules for the competition are pinned in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like, comment, hype, and subscribe to become a guardian of the glaze, and I'll see you next time on the Milky Donut.